There's a question as to whether teaching is primarily a contemplative work or is it an active work?
It's impossible for the teacher to have actually taught if the student hasn't learned. I can't push something without it being pushed at the same time.
Okay, so today we're looking at Aquinas's On the Teacher.
Yeah.
So this is actually, these are 4 articles, and we'll say a little more about what an article is, but 4 articles from Aquinas's much larger work, which is entitled The Disputed Questions on Truth.
Yeah.
And just a word on the disputed questions. So for Thomas Aquinas, living as he did in the 1200s and teaching at the University of Paris, one event that you could regularly expect to happen would be the disputed question. So the master of sacred theology in this case, like Aquinas himself, would be invited by the university and along with his graduate students to take up a particular theme or question, and he would be presented with a series of arguments from the students, pro and con, regarding a particular question. And then he would engage with their arguments, but then that evening, he on his own would sort of summarize the various important positions that have been laid out,
Yeah.
and then craft a more thoughtful and systematic response or position of his own.
Yeah. Along with a response to each of the objections, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, it's good for people who maybe have some familiarity with Aquinas, especially the Summa Theologiae, which is his most famous work. Mm-hmm. It's good to see from time to time the disputed question, because in the Summa, Aquinas will typically, for each article, he'll give maybe 3 or 4 objections, and then his response, and then 3 or 4 brief replies to those objections.
Yeah.
Here in the disputed questions, you can have 20 to 25 objections that come up, and then a lengthy response given by Aquinas, followed by 20 to 25 responses to all the objections. And what's more is that in the case of the disputed question on truth, you're really looking at a series of disputed questions, maybe 50 or so in all, that comprise this massive work. So this would have taken months.
Yeah.
And fortunately for us, they've all been compiled and put together in a very systematic order.
Yeah.
Now here, we're looking at question 11 out of those
30 or 40
questions, and it's subtitled On the Teacher.
Yeah.
So we're looking at what Aquinas says regarding teaching and the ways in which human beings and even angels and God primarily could be said to be teachers.
Yeah.
It's 4 articles in length. The first article asks whether a human can properly be called a teacher.
Yeah.
The second asks whether one can teach oneself.
Yeah.
The third is whether an angel can be said to be a teacher of humans. And the fourth is a question as to whether teaching is primarily a contemplative work or is it an active work?
Yeah.
Does it belong to the contemplative life or the active life,
Right.
as he puts it? So here at the outset, we could wonder what is the big deal, especially as regards the first article. He's asking, can a human being be called a teacher of another human being? And you think, in some way, that's just obvious, right? That's what Aquinas is by profession, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
And humans have always had teachers. And in some way or another, we're engaged in the work of teaching those around us all the time, whether explicitly or just more informally. So why would one even think to raise this as a question?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question as well. It seems like, and you would expect me even to begin with saying something like, clearly human beings can be teachers, so here's how it happens. Mm-hmm. But I think he thinks it's a genuine question, I think in 2 respects. Maybe insofar as and maybe these 2 respects amount to the same root principle, that it seems clear that if you're a believer, a Christian, that God is the primary teacher, that any new understanding you have in some way has to trace back to God, insofar as God is a source of truth and is truth.
Doesn't Christ even say, I alone am your teacher?
Yeah, right. And call no man teacher. And that comes up as one of the explicit objections early on in that first article. So that could be behind it, insofar as you want to safeguard the fact that God is the primary teacher, and He's never going to deny that. But the other thing is, it's as though the other issue that one might have, why they would be suspicious about whether anyone is really a teacher of someone else, is, and maybe this might have two parts as well, it's the way in which words themselves don't force anyone to know something. At least it doesn't seem like it will force them to have the truth. All I'm doing is having thoughts and spitting out sound waves at you, right? And you're hearing the sound waves, and nevertheless, you can, in some sense, ignore them, right? Maybe you'll hear what I say, but not internalize it.
Yeah.
And maybe related to that, and that's really, maybe this is the other side of the same coin, that whenever you hear a certain truth that might even seem, even if you're convinced of it, in some ways it might seem like you can dig in your heels and just resist giving it sort of an intellectual assent, even if the argument, you notice, whether you like it or not, that the argument has a certain strength to it. And so it's as if both of those things suggest that whether you come to learn something is always up to you, and you're never simply you're not putty in the hands of your teacher, right? You can always, whether by stubbornness or by omission, not take in what they're saying, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that every teacher has a familiarity with.
Yeah.
Is that you can stand there in a classroom and be as effective as you think you can be, and there's no guarantee that a student is really picking up on, or, as you say, internalizing what I, as the teacher, am getting at. But maybe the positive flip side of that is, okay, so then a student has really got to be a sort of self-motivator. And that's something we take seriously here at this school, and that's why we sort of engage in the Socratic or discussion seminar method so much of the time, is that as much as possible we're trying to encourage students to be self-learners. So then if you focus on that, you might think, well, really, when I'm engaged in the process of learning, that's got to be something that I take on myself. And maybe people can provide me with resources or aids in some way, but the real work here is being done by my attentiveness and ability to think and so on and so forth. And that might lead you to say, that the primary agent here is really the student. And so
and that suggests, real quick, why the second article is there, right? Maybe you just are just teaching yourself, because St. Thomas is in a way agreeing that you have to be on board in the teaching process to actually receive.
So I guess what we're saying then is this first article, asking whether a human being can be called a teacher, is really, it's asking the if question. Like, is it really true to speak of humans as teachers? But also, given some of the complexities we've already noted, if it is the case, how is it going to be the case, given that both God and the human learner seem to be in different ways primary agents in the process?
And so that's enough to put it under doubt whether the teacher is much more than an occasion for your teaching yourself, or the external teacher, you might say. Maybe it's nothing more than an occasion for your learning from yourself, and God maybe acting in your heart as well. I can't help but thinking, although it's not explicit, I think, in the text, that in the back of St. Thomas's mind is the point that Aristotle drives home in Book 3 of the Physics, that the agent is not an agent if the patient is not undergoing whatever it is the agent's trying to bring about. In other words, it's impossible for the teacher to have actually taught if the student hasn't learned, because those are really the same thing looked at in different respects. And if it's possible for the teacher to think he's teaching and yet the student not have learned, then in a way St. Thomas might say, okay, well, you haven't really taught then, right? Because there's just really two sides of the same coin. It's like, I can't push something without it being pushed at the same time. Right?
That's a great point, and it fits very well with the way we think about ourselves at the end of a day of teaching. I go home, my wife might ask me, how did class go? And my mind immediately goes to not what I did and how I taught
Yeah.
and whether I taught well,
Yeah.
but really,
Whether
as
they
you're
learned.
saying, whether they learned, because that's the real answer to the question.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, it strikes me too that something else that's probably in the background of Thomas's mind here is, which he would, for these purposes, be taken for granted, is the fact that he knows by revelation and through his own philosophical thinking that the human has a spiritual soul and a spiritual intellect. So knowledge is the stuff of spirit. It's immaterial.
Yeah.
And so that just sort of heightens the fact that you might think, okay, the only kind of agent that's going to be able to deal with the mind and with the realm of intelligibility is nothing like a human, but rather God alone.
Yeah.
Or maybe oneself, just because it happens to be my mind.
Yeah. Right.
But that another human person, especially just through the vehicle of sound waves, like you're saying, should be able to fiddle with things as elevated as intellect.
Yeah.
That's off the table.
Yeah. Until we learned how to talk to each other in each other's minds, right? The only way that my thoughts can get into your head, right, is through my manipulation of sound, right? And you're hearing it, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to understand how thoughts could go into the sound, right? Right? And then that goes to you and that gives you the thought yourself because you received the sound, right?
Right.
That sounds fishy, right? And so that's probably a part of the background of this, right?
Okay, so should we get into a little bit here? Aquinas, I mean, he pulls a very interesting move by way of
At the
addressing
beginning?
this question. And just to quote the first couple lines of his primary response to the question, he says that there is the same sort of difference of opinion on three issues: the bringing of forms into existence, the acquiring of virtues, and the acquiring of knowledge.
Yeah.
He calls it scientific knowledge. So we've just waded into a deep river here.
Yeah.
Not only is he going to address the question about teaching and how knowledge occurs, but he feels like he's got to say something about the way in which virtue is acquired, moral virtue, and the way in which natural beings come into existence.
Yeah, how they change,
How they change and how their matter receives form. So this is overwhelming at the outset.
Yeah. It almost seems like he's, like you said, sort of he's. It seems like he's bitten off more than he should be trying to chew here, right? None of these three directly relates to teaching, even, right? To the third one about the acquisition of knowledge is he says, okay, once you know how we acquire knowledge generally, then we can talk about how we can try to work out how someone could make someone acquire knowledge, right? But he's gone into the whole order of agent causality in the physical universe and in the moral side of your soul, and then of course the cognitive side of your soul as well. That's a lot of fish to fry, right?
Yeah. So do you think that he's doing this? I think what you said is a very important point, that the teaching he's placing as kind of second in his response here. But first, we've got to address these three issues. Is he doing this because he wants to show us sort of where the real question lies?
Yeah.
Right? That the immediate question that's being asked is, well, can a human be called a teacher, and if so, how?
Yeah.
And it's as though Aquinas is saying, okay, let me show you that to really adequately approach that question, we've got to deal with something else first.
Yeah, right.
And that is the question as to how knowledge can come about in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, and how changes come about more generally even, right?
Yeah, both in the moral realm and in the natural realm.
Yeah, right. And how one thing acts upon something else. You can see in a generic way how this is going to somehow relate to being a teacher, right? Or teacher relation to the student. And he wants you to see that, I guess, if you look at agent causes more naturally, right? So agent cause meaning the thing outside of something else that acts upon it and causes it to change, be different, right? That it's easy to make similar mistakes to those who are going to make, who he thinks have made mistakes about teachers as well, right? So each of those three views that he mentions, or issues, you might say, has two extremes that he thinks are going too far. They're based on a truth, but they've gone too far, right? They've gone far in opposite directions. And the truth he's going to say is in the middle, which is going to draw the good from both of the sides, I guess, right?
Yeah, this is, before we get into the details here, it seems like this is something that you find repeatedly in Aquinas, that he could go directly to the explicit question.
Right.
And even shy of that, he could restrain himself simply to bringing up the question as to how we acquire knowledge and then link that to teaching. But no, he's chosen to do sort of the most expansive possibility here, which is to relate the coming to be of knowledge, the acquiring of knowledge, with the acquiring of moral virtue and the way in which natural things come to be.
Yeah.
It's hard not to think that's a kind of, we're seeing that the expansiveness, a kind of generosity on Aquinas' part here, as well as maybe an important teaching about how we should think, right? To try and see the connections among things, even things that could seem very disparate at first, but where there is an important connection to be seen, somehow it's really important for us to try and see that connection to have a better handle on it.
Something about seeing what the question you are asking me is a special case of something that happens in many different orders, right? And to see that the answer to each is in a way the same, with the appropriate specifications for each of the cases, about how, I mean, the basic answer in each case is there are ultimate causes, right? But there are secondary causes as well, and nothing can cause itself, right? It seems like the existence of secondary causes can be forgotten by the people that focus on the ultimate first cause, like God, right? And likewise, the fact of the existence of a real coming to be, or a coming to know, or coming to have a form, or coming to have a certain virtue, right? Those can be sort of, you can try to paper over that by saying everything is already there, so no real change happens. You just simply make something manifest that was always actually just beneath the surface, right?
Yeah, so it might be helpful for us to take one of these three realms of phenomena that he's brought up and get into a little bit. So, for example, if we were to take the case of moral virtue, right? How moral virtue comes to be in us. He says that we've got these two extreme views on the matter, neither of which he's going to adopt, and he's going to find his way in the middle. But one of the extremes would be to say, when we're talking about the way in which we become virtuous, or the way in which virtue comes to be in us, really what's going on is that virtue is implanted in us somehow by a higher agent. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you could see again why one might say this, because virtue, like knowledge, has to do with the human spiritual soul.
Yeah, right.
And so you might very well think it's going to have to be the Creator himself, or some spiritual agent that's capable of causing virtue in the human being. The other extreme would be to say, you could even connect it with a more contemporary mantra, but that everyone is fundamentally a good person. And that goodness is part of what it is to be human. And so it's really there all along, but maybe we need to peel away certain
weaknesses,
bad patterns of behavior, or weaknesses, or blindnesses that we have, to let the virtue, the goodness shine forth in all its splendor.
It makes the comparison to burning off the dross off the metal or something like that, right?
So the first extreme is saying, yes, we do come to be virtuous, but only because some higher agent literally sort of pours it into us. The other is saying, we actually don't come to be virtuous. We already are.
We show our virtue maybe in stages or something like that, but we always were saints, if you will, right? Or great heroes.
Right. So then what's Aquinas' middle way in that case? In terms of virtue?
I think he's saying, well, the second, when we start with the second extreme view on the one side, it's true that we have certain foundations in our soul from which virtue can come, but you don't want to lose track of the fact that you really aren't born a saint, right? That those seeds, he calls them, right, of virtue, need to be developed, and there are actually really potentialities or capacities for being virtuous, not actual virtues themselves. And you really do become better if you work at it, I guess. Right? So that's on the one side. On the other side, I guess the presence of those seeds, right, is itself enough to say it's not entirely placed at God's or the first supernatural or spiritual agent's doorstep as being the source of all of it, even though that agency might be indispensable, right? Both as a source of those seeds, but also as maybe giving you grace in the case of supernatural virtues that you can't acquire without divine help. Right?
Okay, so you're saying the way in which Aquinas differs from the first extreme, the God extreme, is by, well, acknowledging the necessity of God, that God is the cause of all.
Yeah.
He creates us the way we are with these initial foundations of virtue.
Inclinations, whatever you want to call it, yeah.
Yeah, but that our actions play a crucial, though secondary role to what God is doing. And that's where you were referring to this language of secondary causality.
Yeah, right.
That God is the primary cause of all, but we are crucially secondary causes or secondary agents in our own life of moral virtue.
Right. Yep.
And in fact, doesn't that accord with the undeniable fact that we do blame ourselves and we blame others when they act certain ways or praise them when they act in better ways?
Yeah.
That in itself kind of indicates that we can't help but regard human actions as playing some sort of decisive role in the moral life.
Yeah, we bear at least some responsibility, right, for what we do.
Yeah. So, okay, so then let's see how this same kind of analysis funnels over to the question of knowledge and how knowledge comes to be. So we've done some of the work already. I guess Aquinas would be saying, okay, to those of you who hold that it could only be God that causes knowledge in us, well, don't we want to modify that a little bit? And while keeping God as an ultimate cause of ourselves and of truth, we need to recognize that there are actions that occur in the human realm that really do help knowledge come about within our lives.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got to read. We've got to study. We've got to listen to others. We've got to talk to people.
Yeah, and you've got to have those little seminal notions too, that from which any new knowledge comes, right? So that's something in you, but it doesn't. You don't teach yourself all that easily. You need things outside yourself to sort of hold your attention, to take those initial thoughts, those first conceptions of the mind that are maybe the most fundamental ones are absolutely certain and they're self-evident, and you maybe acquired those just naturally, right? And therefore ultimately from God, insofar as He gives you your nature and the strength of your nature to draw those principles or conceptions out of reality. But you have to then take those thoughts, those initial conceptions, and marshal them in a way that they will yield new truth, right? And it's up to you whether you're going to do that, and maybe up to things that you see around you that make you think about ways of putting principles together and drawing new conclusions, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned these primary seeds of knowledge or primary notions or principles that we possess naturally, just in virtue of being created as we are. Would something like the principle of non-contradiction be an example of that? That even if we haven't spelled it out to ourselves, a 10-year-old in some real way knows the principle of non-contradiction, right? It's required for any thinking or discourse to occur.
And if kids disagree about something, they're assuming the principle of contradiction, right? Who ate the last cookie, right? Was it you? No, it wasn't me, right? You by denying the assertion, right? You're accepting the principle of contradiction right there. Yeah. So you see that everybody knows this more or less, even if they might try to deny it in words. They aren't really thinking closely about what they're actually saying there.
Yeah, and it's kind of remarkable that never has to be taught.
Yeah.
Right? So that there's an indication that is something, as Aquinas acknowledges, that we simply as rational beings, we kind of possess it.
Yeah.
But that's a very sort of minimum threshold into
not
the
much.
realm of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where his middle way comes forward to say that to really advance in the life of the mind, or to advance in our coming to know, we have to build on principles like the principle of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
And that involves actions that we ourselves take, not simply waiting for God to pour knowledge into us.
Yeah, to teach us.
Yeah.
Finally, yeah. And it's maybe even worth adding that Aquinas is not saying that awareness of the principle of contradiction and the other first principles is something you're born with, as if there are certain things you always know. He's pretty clear about saying that itself is somehow gathered by your first ordinary experience of things. You don't have to live long, since, as you said, a child knows this. But insofar as reality, you might say, teaches you, in some loose sense of the word, teaches you. It gives you these sensations that your mind's able to see certain basic principles from, like the whole is greater than the part, or the principle of contradiction, or things equal to the same thing or equal to each other, those sorts of axioms. They come to us naturally. We're not born with them, like Socrates will say, or even opinion number 2 says, or at least there's certain things you're born with, right? St. Thomas is sort of granting, you're not really born with anything, but you do actually have an arsenal of axioms that you do know. Everybody knows these things. And from those, further knowledge can happen if you put some effort into it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that speaks to the way in which Aquinas holds to the unity of the human person in terms of soul and body. Right? If you thought, as sometimes Socrates seems to think, if you thought that what we are is fundamentally a mind, but with a kind of bodily trapping that we find ourselves in, then it could make sense to say that from the very moment of your existence, mind knows these fundamental principles. Aquinas, on the other hand, thinks that what we are is simply a unity of soul and materiality, right? Such that you could say the spiritual soul and the physical materiality are not beings unto themselves so much as principles of the one being that is us. And so we wouldn't expect our minds to be fully actual from the moment we come to be, but rather there's an immense amount of bodily complexity and integration and activity, and especially on the part of the senses, that has to occur in those first couple years of our lives in order for our minds to start kicking into gear. But maybe as soon as they do so, the principles you've been talking about, these fundamental axioms, are present.
You've got the raw materials at that point. If we weren't essentially composites of soul and body, I guess this is saying the same thing you said, I suppose. If we weren't essentially composites of soul and body, you would think that there'd just be some natural content to the soul, to the mind itself, right? It would just have a certain stockpile. It would be strange for us to have a soul that's a complete autonomous substance, if you will, whose primary activity is knowing, and yet it knows nothing, right? But it must have something built in there if you're thinking the soul is its own thing. But if it's essentially something that operates, by its nature, operates through a body, right? Then it must be through bodily organs like eyeballs, right, and ears, and these are the channels, if you will, to our intellect, giving it content, right? Giving it something to be nourished by, I suppose.
Yeah, and this will kind of lead, I think, nicely into the next issue that he brings up, which is really the goal here,
the main issue,
which is, okay, we've seen something about how knowledge comes about in us, that it can come about, and that we are somehow involved. How does this connect up with the notion of a teacher? And specifically, how we could call a human being a teacher?
Yeah, this is hard for me to see, actually, and I appreciate your help in this. I guess I'm thinking it does seem like he's saying what a teacher does is he does do the things we were saying early on. That is, the teacher's got these thoughts. Maybe he's got a proof for something. Say that the interior angles of a triangle equal 2 right angles. He can articulate that in words, right? The words that actually do signify that truth and signify the argument for that truth. And he could pass all those on to you. But he still doesn't force the knowledge. And the words have to be sort of grasped by the reader. They have to, or the listener, I should say, the student. They have to hear the sounds, think the things the teacher is thinking on their own, if you will, right? Or for themselves. Grasp them, grasp the certainty of those principles that the teacher has asserted, and on his own see that these principles imply that consequence, that the interior angles of a triangle equal 2 rights. So the teacher is he is presenting the knowledge to you, but he's not making it be your knowledge. Is that making sense? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is there a better way to describe what he's saying?
No, I think so. I think that's right. In terms of what he's presenting, so if we focus on that kind of positive side, and we'll get to the limitation that you're bringing up in a minute, but Aquinas refers to it as the teacher in a way is replicating for you, or guiding you along a process whereby
where he
you
is going.
start from those fundamental principles we were talking about, and then move from them to something new, some new realization, some new truth. How do I go from knowing the whole is greater than the part, and knowing the principle of contradiction, to then being able to know something interesting about a triangle? Well, left to my own devices, might take me a long time, if at all. But a teacher can present this path to you.
The path that he went down, right?
Yeah.
The teacher's like giving you directions. Is that the way to describe it? How do you get from here to there, right? So, well, here's how I go there, right? And give you each of the steps, and you can think through it with them. And then if you grasp each of the steps, you say, okay, I see how to get there, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, is the view of the teacher is something fundamentally more like a guide? And that connects up with the second thing you were saying, which is this limitation, that even granted what the teacher is capable of doing, sort of guiding the student's own intellectual actions, the teacher can't be finally effective in the sense that, and Socrates puts this very well, the teacher can't just give knowledge to a student. So why, So
it's not like the way fire can just sort of force heat upon a piece of wood or something like that. That the wood's going to receive it whether it wants it or not.
Yes.
Right. It's much more like the fire tells the wood how to get hot, right? And the wood either does or it doesn't, I suppose.
Yeah. So when it comes back to this question of what we mean in saying that the human is a teacher, I guess the first thing to note is, well, Aquinas certainly wants to say. The answer to the first question is yes. So can we call a human a teacher? Yes, because the teacher is this guide, this instruction giver as to the route you want to take as a learner to learn something. Is that sufficient? Is that enough to speak of a human as a teacher?
It depends on whether you're thinking of the teacher as simply like any sort of any transitive verb. You tend to think about the agent as forcing its effect upon something else, right? As if it has a sort of complete dominion over whatever it is it's acting upon. And so it's coercive in that respect, right? Whereas what the teacher is doing is much more like courtship almost, right? You're eliciting a path to somebody, right? You're showing somebody something, and it's up to them whether they look, right? Or they hold their attention long enough to look, right? So it requires an active response. I guess we said that before, but it's something like that. As long as you're thinking what it is to be a teacher is one who shows the truth, right? Then teachers, the human beings can be teachers, right? If you think about the teacher as someone that really gets into you and kind of makes, in some sense, makes you know something new, then I guess St. Thomas is saying, that's not really what human teachers can do, right?
Yeah, I keep going back to your image, which I thought was a really nice one of the giving directions. Yeah. So how would the teacher in that light would fundamentally fail if he or she gave the wrong directions?
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
But there's there would be a kind of tacit recognition of the fact that if the person seeking directions either weren't to get to the destination, sort of decided not to, or just through some other error took a wrong turn, that wouldn't be the teacher failing.
Yeah, right.
Aquinas also brings up the comparison to medicine.
Yeah, right.
And the fact that
that's good.
we look at the activities of a doctor, and so we tend to be arrested by those activities, and we think, well, the doctor is the one doing the healing.
Yeah, right.
Right? It does the stitching and so on and so forth. But Aquinas calls our attention to the fact that, well, if we really think about it, we can't help but realize that the body is the one
doing the work,
doing the healing.
Yeah.
But it's through this assistance of the doctor. So the doctor can't put the stitches in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Can't make them too loose or too tight. But fundamentally, it's the body that's in some way the agent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's the body that's the agent, and you see that the work of the physician, that the doctor is he's imitating what nature does if it were a little bit stronger, or if it were left to itself. It's a point that he makes a lot, that every art in some way imitates the way nature operates. And you can see medicine's sort of a really nice example of that, right? So if you're bleeding, right, your blood coagulates to protect the wound, right? And you imitate that as a physician by putting a bandage on it, right? It's sort of like, okay, it takes too long for the blood to coagulate, and maybe you're losing the blood too fast. So you put the bandage on there to help the blood do what it wants to do, which helps protect or produce the healing. Or if you've got a thorn or something in your finger, right? The body naturally produces a pocket of pus around it. I guess I'm getting kind of gross here, but at any rate, it does that to protect the rest of the finger from infection, right? And sometimes it increases the pressure on that so that it will eventually pop, right? And leak out whatever the thorn is, right? And drain the fluid. That's again just to save the finger, and so the doctor will help that along by lancing the pustule sometimes, right? So the physician's always, well, at least frequently, is doing what nature would do on it, what it's trying to do by itself. The doctor sort of figures out what his healing should be based on what nature is already trying to do in its healing. And so the teacher, I guess, is analogous to that, right? The teacher sees the way to get from these premises to that conclusion, and left to himself, the student might be able to work out that the student wants to get to that conclusion too, and he might be able to work out the path to get to that conclusion, but the teacher steps in to sort of help it along, be more efficient, right?
Yes, but I wonder if in a lot of cases at least we could press it even one step further to say that the likelihood of a student getting to know the things that you can get from most of our teachers is very slim.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe certain very incredibly distinct narrow spheres of learning, you could let the student out on their own.
Yeah, and they'll make some progress.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But to just learn algebra, for example, right? It's almost inconceivable that a human could just do that on their own.
Yeah. So you're saying nature is better at healing the organism than the student is better at teaching himself or progressing far in the direction of science. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, that might be right.
Yeah.
So kind of going back to the question of the article, can a human be called teacher? It seems like what Aquinas has done here is something kind of amazing, because he wants to say yes, but I wonder if that's predicated primarily on just the kind of sheer necessity for such persons in our lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
we need directions given to us for most of the places we want to try to get to in our existence intellectually. But he's also qualified what teaching amounts to in the case of a human.
Humans, yeah.
By really giving the nod to what's going on inside of the student themselves, by way of actually being the one to accomplish the act of knowing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to that, and it's sort of then. Yeah, I guess I'll just say that it seems like that's really right, and maybe at the end of the day, I can't help but wondering if part of the reason why we need so much help. I mean, man is by nature social, right? And so it makes sense that we would need each other to learn, even if it's true that most of the most essential parts of the work of the learning happen inside your soul. But I'm wondering, even setting aside man's natural sociability and mutual need for each other, I wonder if part of the reason one might see the difference between healing, right, and learning, in terms of how easy it is for us how good our body is at healing itself, as distinct from how good it is at moving us, progressing us in knowledge. Maybe it has something to do with sin or original sin. St. Thomas doesn't bring this up at all in this context, but I keep thinking that it does seem like we should be better at it than we are at learning on our own. But as maybe it's an effect of the fall. I think it's certainly an effect of personal sin, as it makes it harder to learn certain things, certainly things in the moral realm, but maybe more broadly. But it does also seem like maybe that's a benefit. We use the expression, especially now in Eastertide, of "Oh, happy fault." One of the benefits of us having of the fall, right, and of sin, might be we depend upon each other more so, right, for learning. I know this is getting kind of far afield from the text that St. Thomas presents it, but we need each other much more now because we have this weakness. It's like we're chronically ill in our minds or something like that, and we need more support there than we do in just getting over a head cold, right, or most bodily injuries, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Aquinas comes close to saying something like that when he says a bit toward the end of this. It's a very long opening article, but he essentially says that, or in fact, it might be an article too, but he says that for the student, the one who's doing the learning, there's something particularly excellent about being able to figure it out
on your own
by yourself and simply discovering the truth for yourself. And we all recognize that.
Sure.
Oh, that's a great thing to be able to do. But then he says, for the one who's teaching, it's being able to bring about knowledge, even if only sort of indirectly and secondarily, through instruction, is itself a work of a kind of perfection. It's a kind of excellence. And that's speaking to what you're saying, the interpersonal dimension that's involved here. And although he doesn't mention it, it seems like the flip side of that coin is you could also look at the student not just as one seeking knowledge, but as a kind of recipient of a gift or a beneficiary, and that in terms of human community, there's something excellent about that.
And because it produces gratitude for one thing, right? And it also produces humility. I've always thought about that point St. Thomas makes about if you can discover something on your own, there's a greater excellence there. But I always think, there's also an occasion for pride there, right? The people that are quicker witted, right, I think have, at least in that particular respect, have a temptation towards pride that makes it more difficult for them to learn from others because they want that the sense of accomplishment that comes from discovery on your own, right, and having found the new truth that no one else has found before. So insofar as that's really hard for most of us to do, right, it's good for us. Right? It's morally good for us that we have to benefit from our teachers and from our parents or people that are communicating with us, right? Shows the virtue of listening too, by the way, as opposed to speaking, right?
That's true.
Because listening is the only way you can learn, right? Whereas speaking is for the sake of teaching, one way or another.
And that's something Augustine brings up who writes his own dialogue on the teacher,
Yeah, right.
and with whom Aquinas is in a close dialogue himself
conversation.
in these articles.
Yeah.
One other point that might deserve to be mentioned, although Aquinas himself doesn't state it explicitly, but it follows from the way he's been speaking here, is that it's really incumbent on a teacher to, well, yes, know this road, this path from fundamental principles to a conclusion, but to the extent possible, also important for the teacher to know the student.
Yeah.
Right? Just as a doctor is going to have to take stock of, okay, what's the particular physiology of the human that I have in front of me?
Yep.
This particular patient, so as to lead things in the best direction. Well, we see the need for that in the case of teaching. Also, there are these individual particularities that people have.
Yeah.
So some learn better in this way, some learn better in another way.
He even makes the point at one point, doesn't he? He says that it's not enough to have taught, you haven't necessarily taught successfully simply by giving the argument from the self-evident principles to the conclusion. If by any chance your student doesn't recognize the principles as principles, right? He says if giving the adequate argument is not, you haven't got a success story yet until the student is on board with the principles as well. So if you know your student, you can know what they grasp, or find out at least in conversation, what they grasp, and start from those things. And if they don't, then you got to back up and defend the principles you need, right?
That is so true. And it's a mark against a number of forms of writing and communication that there isn't sufficient time given at the outset to establish some point of commonality that you can regard as a sort of shared principle that you can then work from in a fruitful way towards something new. Okay, well, we could open it up a little. That we've got the second article has to do with whether we could speak of a person teaching themselves. The third has to do with the notion of an angelic teacher. And again, the fourth, should we consider teaching a contemplative, speculative activity primarily, or a more active and practical one? What do you feel like talking about?
Well, it'd be easiest to talk about that last one right now, because we're sort of starting to talk about it the way, because he comes down pretty hard on the question in favor of the conclusion that it belongs more to the active life to teach, right? Because it's an act of service, right, for other people. Even if you, as a philosopher or theologian, in and of itself would prefer to be thinking about wonderful truths, right? It is an act of mercy. I think he calls it a spiritual work of mercy, right? To teach, because you are fundamentally not just gazing at the truth that you know, right? But working at conveying it, right, to the extent that you can, right?
Yeah, and one of the amazing things about that is that there's a sort of reflexive or doubling back effect, namely, well, most teachers realize that you only fully know something once you're able to teach it.
Yeah, right.
So that's it's an interesting testament to the importance of this act of service that we're talking about, or the notion of a kind of sharing or communication of the truth, that somehow it achieves its own perfection in and through that kind of activity.
Yeah. And it has a collateral effect if you have side effect, I guess, that if the student does not, if the student has an objection and they've listened closely to your argument, you might start to realize, I didn't understand some of the premises of my own argument, right? Or I was not as certain of the truth as I thought I was, right? So you might have the benefit of realizing the limitations of your own understanding, and maybe it encourages you to rethink things that you're trying to teach, in fact.
Yeah. Part of the effect this has on me when I'm reading about it and thinking about it is to reflect on Aquinas himself as a teacher. He's so systematic in his method of arguing. He's very logical, syllogistic, right? He's always proceeding as methodically and efficiently as he can from a premise to a conclusion. And I think it's just helpful to see his modality in the light of the kind of thing we've been talking about. Because you can approach Aquinas and think there's something very sort of impersonal kind of cold about it.
Yeah.
But in reality, he's attending to the work of service.
Yeah,
Right? He's
yeah.
trying to say, look, what I've done here is at least attempt to present things in a manner that's best suited to what you're after as a learner, which is being able to come to see something for yourself.
Yeah.
And so you could see Aquinas here as putting himself entirely at the disposal of that shared activity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just always bearing his heart to some extent, right? When he's explaining about in the final article. Maybe you could even say that he's, how to put this exactly, he's exemplifying what he's trying to teach in the way he's teaching it here. He's not just, again, the caricature of him would be that he's a stuffy professor that's just saying, this is the truth, here's the argument, take it or leave it, right? But rather he's, just by the structure of a disputation, the way he begins with 20 objections in the first article, or close to 20. These are objections from the students themselves, right? They give these arguments against the question, and he takes some objections from other students again in favor of the question. He prevents his own thoughts, but it's not over them. But he actually then says, okay, and here's what's right about what you're saying in this mistaken objection, but here's what's wrong, and he does that for each of them, right? And there's no contempt in it, right? It's just sort of telling you this is what we were missing, right?
Yeah. So
there's nothing harsh about it. He also doesn't name names, like your brother Fred over there in the back of the class. He made this objection. Here's why Fred's wrong, right? It's
there's Fred again.
Yeah. And you wonder if some of these are repeat offender objections, right? But no, he doesn't. There's no name calling or even identification, doxing, as we would say now.
Yeah, it really is astonishing when you put it that way, and there's a kind of generosity that's just remarkable, that we could, in our current academic circles, use more of.
Yeah.
Right. This sort of deep engagement with what others are thinking.
Yeah. What about you, John? Did you want to look at any of the other particular articles? Third or the second, or particular parts of the others?
Yeah, I have to say I was struck by the third one this time around in a way that I never have been before.
Yeah,
so,
the angels.
Yeah, angelic teaching.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I had always been tempted to sort of dismiss this a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think what he's saying has got to be right. He talks about the fact that angels, as these superior intellects, are capable of teaching us.
Yeah.
But I guess what struck me this time around is he spends a lot of time on it.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to take it very seriously as an important truth. Mm. And then I guess I kind of realized, well, Aquinas thinks that there's a community of these intellectual beings that's really in existence. Mm-hmm. And elsewhere he talks about how he argues that there are likely far more angels than there are humans.
Yeah.
But that these beings themselves are intent upon a kind of work of service, the same work of service we've been talking about, but for our benefit.
Yeah.
And
maybe even for their mutual benefit. He does speak about angels teaching each other as well. Less of that in here, I guess, but elsewhere he speaks about their community of the higher angels teaching the lower angels. But he's stressing here, we're the lowest of the intellectual beings, St. Thomas will say, right? And we're receiving teaching as well.
Yes, and that would be in some way, their primary mode of personal communication.
Yeah.
It's because they aren't bodily.
Yeah.
So the wave, the hug, the words through sound, right?
Yeah.
None of that's there for them.
Yeah.
But what they are great at, is the intellectual contact.
Yeah.
And that's what he's trying to describe. Of course, he can't describe it in some sort of complete, positive, clear way, because we're talking about a realm that's beyond us. Mm-hmm. But he's giving us a kind of the contours of what this sort of activity might look like. Yeah. That there's some way in which the intellectual vision and power that an angel possesses can help strengthen our own.
Yeah.
And I guess I take that more seriously now than I did before.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting insofar as a further sign that St. Thomas and his students were really interested in the question is there's again something close to 20 objections in that. There's most of these others have 10 or less other articles in the De Veritate, But
Wow.
the third article is the longest in terms of objections, and the sed contra, opposite objections. You think this is right too, that maybe he's also trying to fill in the picture where he said, on the one hand, God is the ultimate teacher because he actually holds us in being, gives our intellects what strength they have, what light they have, and even gives us the natures from which we readily acquire these first concepts. And on the other hand, there are human teachers that really can only work at the level of sounds and presenting paths that they themselves have followed on to hope to, if you're listening, right, you will also see how to follow that path. He's trying to say there's an intermediate way of teaching because the angels don't teach us through sounds except in maybe miraculous circumstances. The way maybe the fire spoke to Moses or something like that. But he says explicitly, I'm setting that aside, right? Because that's not the natural way in which an angelic being would teach. But it does it somehow by getting into not your intellect directly, but getting into your imagination and into your brain in some sense, nudging things in the right direction. I'm not sure if he's imagining the normal activities of angels or something they do on special occasions. I wasn't certain about that as I was reading this, but it's at least it's a more efficacious, at least it could be a more efficacious kind of teaching than what a human teacher could do for you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the human teacher, through the words, these sounds, these particular configurations of sound, is able to help us conjure up certain images that we associate with those words, which images in turn help dispose or ready our intellect to see something intelligible. Whereas you're saying, so the angel kind of can entirely bypass the necessity of sound and words and go directly to the realm of the image and help contour our images or strengthen them and so as to better prepare our intellect for vision. So that we have to see that in itself in a subtle manner, right? So I mean, because imaginatively you're tempted to think of an angel as kind of coming along and sort of fiddling around with your brain. Which sounds strange to say.
Right. And I don't think St. Thomas is saying something, whatever you dreamt last night, that was an angel or a demon that gave you those thoughts. I don't think he's saying whenever a new image spontaneously occurs to you, that must be coming from one of these angelic beings. But
is the idea that because for us, the realm of our sort of interior sense images, that's so closely connected with our intellect that there's something, you might say it participates in the intellectual realm in some way. And so that becomes terrain within which an angel is able to operate. Because of its close connection with intellect.
That's right. It seems like that's what he's saying, something like that. And it makes sense, right?
And he even talks about how, in terms of our own intellectual power or vision, he calls it intellectual light, the kind of strength by which we can see things intellectually, that an angel is able to strengthen that in us.
The light itself, not create it, but strengthen it,
through the angel's own proximity, through his own assistance, his own intellectual light, sort of conjointly with ours, illuminating something. It's just a remarkable way to see the connection between spiritual beings.
I had a professor once that used to pray before each of his classes, where he would pray for our guardian angels to help us before we're about to undertake a class, an intellectual endeavor, right? And I think he would use the language of illumine our images, right? Strengthen our images. He doesn't mention the word guardian angel at all in this, but that's clearly an immediate corollary of what he's saying, is that maybe you should be asking your angel for help, right?
Yeah, and I think it helps. You brought up the burning bush earlier. So, and Aquinas in his commentaries is pretty clear on the fact that he regards that as an angelic presence, speaking sort of the spokesperson of the Lord. But when we think about the way the angelic presence is depicted in the scriptures, I think that's also helpful. There's something terrible in the real sense of that word, or kind of terrifying, like an immense presence here, an immense force, a power that's quite beyond this entire cosmos, such as to tend to strike fear into the hearts of the humans.
Sure.
As opposed to...
That's why the angels are constantly, at least the angels, when it appears to Mary, do not be afraid.
Right.
First words are, calm down, right?
Yeah.
Easter Sunday as well, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Don't be afraid.
Certain artistic depictions can have the opposite effect for us of domesticating them too much. But I think when we see it in that context, the kinds of things Aquinas is saying here are somehow more palatable. Right? That why shouldn't we think a being of that sort would be able to help us see things?
Help us along and be at work.
Well, there's more we could say as on all of these works, but that was an interesting conversation. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, John.